noticed that Jim was cutting in and out a little bit. I just want to make sure that it doesn't do that. Well, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting AAALAC to participate, both our global director and myself. It is always a privilege to be with all of you, and I'm sorry I don't get to see you all more often than at this conference. So I know there was a talk yesterday given by Professor Kasai about environmental enrichment at Tohoku University. I'm hoping that was a very pragmatic talk. I'm sorry I missed it. I was not able to get here before last night. And what I intend to do today is to try and relate environmental enrichment more directly to the 3 R's and to describe some of the controversy that's been around it, emerging concepts around it, so hopefully you'll have some different takeaway messages from this presentation than you did from the one yesterday. So in thinking about environmental enrichment as a science, it has been variously defined, mostly in terms of providing some additional cage complexity, whatever that complexity might be, a social partner, so it could be animate or inanimate, such as nesting material. And those additions to the cage environment are meant to improve the welfare of the animal, obviously, without harming it and without causing any ill health, as well as physical damage to the animal. Sometimes the objective of the enrichment is to increase the expression of a behavior, and sometimes the objective of the enrichment is to decrease the expression of a behavior. So that's the purist view of environmental enrichment. However, I'm not going to be a purist today. I'm going to talk more holistically, my view of what environmental enrichment is, and that's the entire environment of the animal, both at the primary enclosure level, the cage space, as well as the room and other potential impacts on that animal's welfare. So what you see here is a list of what I consider a more holistic view of what the environmental enrichment picture should be for the animal. So again, the actual cage, the manner in which the animal's housed, so the cage as well as the room, or if it's a pen and it has an outdoor enclosure, whatever the species we're talking about. But beyond that, it's the actual handling of the animal, how that animal is moved out of its cage to, say, a study area, back to the cage, how the animal is restrained. Are there more progressive, minimalistic ways in which that restraint is performed, as well as the actual husbandry procedures, because those can clearly impact on the animal. Cage sanitation, which might have some impact on the scent marking in the environment, the cage environment, the way the food is presented. So is the animal able to forage? Do they get a variety of types of food, again, depending on the species? And of pivotal importance, the personnel themselves. Are they trained in the behaviors of the species of animal? Do they know how to recognize signs of pain and distress? So the personnel impact on the animal as well. All of that, in my mind, provides this more holistic view to enrichment. So in looking at which of the 3 R's are mostly impacted by environmental enrichment, I'm going to focus on 2 of the 3 R's, refinement and reduction. And in looking at, I'm going to spend most of my time on refinement, quite frankly, because that's where most of the publications have occurred. But I feel that looking at enrichment in terms of reduction is a more emerging piece, or if we just tilt our perspective a little bit, I think we'll see how enrichment actually contributes to reduction in many, many studies, although it's less published on. So obviously with refinement, if we're providing the appropriate enrichment, and I underscore that the enrichment has to be meaningful to the animal and good consideration has to be given in how it's presented, that will in fact result in reducing stress of the animal and promote both physical and behavioral health. In terms of enrichment providing reduction of animal use, I would suggest that this is by controlling variation among animals used in studies, and therein lies a point of controversy that we're going to elaborate on in just a couple minutes. But also by minimizing animal loss. For example, if nesting material is provided in a bedded cage, young rodents may have better survivability, particularly some of our more fragile transgenic strains. Young pigs, I'm going to provide an example later on, that actually have a more robust health picture during the weaning process because of the presence of enrichment. I'm hoping that everybody in the audience is well aware of the vast amount of literature that has been published about the negative impact on animal welfare when our research animals are housed in barren environments. And that evidence takes a lot of different forms. And so perhaps one of the more common manifestations of poor welfare using behavior as the metric or the indicator of that poor welfare is the occurrence of stereotypical behavior. Now, these are behaviors that can really manifest in a variety of different ways, but all across the spectrum, they have two things in common. They're repetitive in nature, and there is no obvious goal achieved by the performance of the behavior. So they're referred to as being non-goal oriented. Most often, they are locomotive behaviors. So the animal that's circling repetitively in its cage, pacing, jumping, flipping, repetitive bouncing. Probably all of you have seen some species or other engage in stereotypic behavior. But there are other types of stereotypical behaviors that are non-locomotive in nature. So you may occasionally see primates that have what's called the floating limb syndrome. So typically an arm that just floats up, the animal's not even aware that it's happening. Sometimes you'll see a monkey salute. Licking behavior in a variety of species, rodents, rabbits, dogs, you name it. Barbering, obviously most commonly in rodents, such as I've shown here in the picture. And then there are other abnormal behaviors that are not stereotypical in nature, but that certainly are manifestations of stress to the animal. So you may see fearful behaviors such as a dog that's trembling in a run or a cage, crouching animals, ones that are actually hyper-aggressive, which may be a manifestation of fear. And then unfortunately, we do see at a very serious level in some species self-injurious behavior. Probably if we see this, it's going to be most common in non-human primates, but I've seen it also in some of the Mustelidae, where they will actually gnaw on their limbs. But it can be as minor as plucking out hair. So there's a whole range of self-injurious behavior, which really should be a very significant trigger that something's quite wrong in the animal's environment. So the presence of abnormal behavior should be taken very seriously as an indicator of poor health and welfare. And as not only that, but as a scientist, one would be concerned because if animals are manifesting poor welfare, bad behavior, you're having variability injected into your studies. And so Joe Garner, this is a quote from him from one of his publications that I think really nails this problem. And he says that variation in abnormal behavior between individuals is likely to reflect differences in physiology and hence could add considerable between individual noise to susceptible experimental outcomes, thereby reducing the reliability of experimental measures and of the experiments themselves. So if you've got animals manifesting some range of abnormal behaviors in your colony, whether it's barbering in mice, stereotypic locomotion in primates or dogs, and those dogs or monkeys or mice are not manifesting the exact same level of abnormal behavior, not only is it bad because it's just morally wrong for them to have abnormal behaviors because we're stressing them out, but it's giving you very unreliable data. There are clearly many causative factors to poor welfare in our research animals in the housing environment. So social isolation being one of them, where you have a social species of animal that's being housed alone in its cage, perhaps even alone in a room. You can have inappropriate social environments, so there's a manner of housing the animals where there are no ways for the animals to get away from each other if some aggressive bout breaks out. So whether there's primates in a corral that can't get away from each other, or mice in a cage that are starting to scuffle and they can't get a visual break from each other to stop that aggressive incident. Where the group composition is simply not compatible. Males housed together, rodents, mice, C57 black in particular, often some aggression there, so the social composition is not appropriate for the species or strain of animal. Inadequate opportunities to engage in normal behavior, so they don't have an opportunity if it's an animal that spends 70% of its day foraging, like many of our monkeys do, and then they're dumped in a bunch of monkey chow in the cage, no opportunity to forage. And in my research laboratory several years ago, we measured the average monkey takes less than an hour to consume its chow. That's not 70% of its waking cycle. So this absence of the opportunity to express normal behaviors can result in increased stress profile for the animal. And then just basic environmental stressors. The room's too hot, the room's too cold, the temperature is off for that species of animal, the room lighting is too bright, it's more often the problem than it being too dim, too much noise in the environment, say the room is too close to a lot of traffic, of cages being moved, or near a cage wash area where there's a lot of noise. There are a lot of environmental factors in that secondary enclosure that can cause inappropriate behaviors and, again, be a cause of stress. Sensory and or motor limitations, so animals that travel far during their day, in the normal routine day, again thinking primates that travel great distances while they're foraging and suddenly they're in a cage. So the motor limitations, or sensory limitations where they can't see other animals in the room because of the way the caging is designed. The very procedures that we use on them, basic husbandry practices like sanitation, I mentioned earlier, we're so excessively cleaning the cage, we're removing all scent marking behavior for some species of animal, and then they have to go about.
And they used to just hold it and sip it whenever they want. Another thing, what you said, activity particularly, instead of say activity means from down to above, the apartment type of cage, we prepared apartment type of cages and then gave them a docking apartment. Means 8 double type apartments are docked, and they had the doors, and whenever the activity was needed, they used to crawl, they used to move and do anything and everything. Another one is that means they were so happy. The thing is that, see, what we thought about the treats is that they should enjoy. See, if you give a raw fruit, well clean raw fruit, they will eat immediately, put them in the pouches and go on eating it. But what we wanted to do is that the chewing gum like thing. So we tried to give them freeze-dried fruits, like say pineapple, mango, and they used to chew it for not hours, but several minutes, and they used to enjoy it.
What is your question, please?
It is not my question, sir. I am trying to appreciate the purpose of AAALAC and just congratulating Kathryn.
Thank you so much.
There is one more point, please.
Because we are running short of time.
Just one more point, I will take just 1 minute. This is about the 3 R's, in fact, James said. We are following here 4th R also. The rehabilitation,
Right.
especially in case of non-human primates. And it's a very important assignment and important task to be understood, having the essence of the AAALAC and the guide, and then follow it. So that is another thing where they get complete enjoyment in the life for the lifetime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments.
I have a question here.
We are running short of time, maybe like during discussion.
Thank you, Kathryn. Well, I don't provide the enrichment. Do you think the stabilization or quarantine period is sufficient for them to adjust? And if we experiment, whether the results are acceptable or reproducible?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Was that about the quarantine period?
Yes, the
And
stabilization.
providing enrichment during the quarantine period?
No, we don't provide the quarantine, the enrichment here. We procure the animal from an enriched animal facility, but now for experimentation, we don't provide.
So you're moving from an enriched environment to an unenriched environment for the,
Exactly.
yeah, and we actually evaluated that in our laboratory, and what we saw was what we referred to in the literature is we coined the phrase a rebound effect. So they came to our laboratory not having been enriched. We enriched them. They went back to an unenriched environment, often in a laboratory, and we had a significant increase in abnormal behavior as even compared to baseline. So it is a problem, and I understand that investigators have limitations, but remembering that there is a whole spectrum of possible enrichments that can be offered even a single species of animal, there may be ways to evaluate if some enrichments can be carried forward into the scientific environment without confounding the data the researchers trying to obtain.
So you advocate for the enrichment, some sort of enrichment?
Animals or domestication of,
Well, they certainly live longer in
Yes,
domestic
naturally.
circumstances than
Yeah.
they do in the
So-
wild. Yeah.
So I request Dr. Jha to present a moment.